Bud Not Buddy, Chapter 11, Part 2. Bud, wake up, Bud. It was a woman's voice, and her hands were trying to shake me awake. Uh-oh. This is number 29 of my rules. Rules and things number 29. When you wake up and don't know for sure where you're at and there's a bunch of people standing around you, it's best to pretend you're still sleeping until you can figure out what is going on and what you should do. I kept my eyes closed, eyes closed, acting like I was out cold. The woman said, "Papa, what on earth are all these lumps and bites on this baby's face?" The man answered, "Well, he was walking all the way from Grand Rapids to Flint. It looks like he provided a pretty paltry meal for every mosquito along the way." The woman said, "This poor child must be dead. I hate getting him up. I wish he could stay with us for a while, at least until he's had enough sleep." Then I remembered who I was with because Lefty Lewis said, "I know, but I've got to get back. He can sleep in the car on the way back to Grand Rapids." The woman rolled back the blanket they'd put over me and said, "Papa, look at his legs. This boy's as skinny as a rail." Shucks. They'd taken off my knickers when they put me in this bed. Now I was going to have to pretend I was asleep even longer, at least so I could figure out a way of being so embarrassed. Lefty Lewis said, "Yeah, he's puny. Good thing his legs don't touch when he walks, 'cause if those two twigs got to rubbing against one another, he'd have a fire going in no time." The woman said, "That's not funny. He doesn't look like he's been fed right. Now, who's his father again? You said you know him?" "Everyone in Grand Rapids does. I'm surprised you can't remember him. He's quite a big fish there." "See, I told you it was smart to pretend you were asleep some of the time. Now I was going to learn some things about my father." The woman said, "What kind of man is he that he let this child be so thin? And look at the condition of this boy's clothes. Everything is either too small for him or almost in tatters. Where is the child's mother? There's not much of a woman's touch about him." Lefty Lewis says, "It seems to me that Mrs. Calloway I knew passed a long time ago. The boy says he's 10, and I'm sure she died quite a while before that. But you know how musicians are. There must be at least a few Mrs. Callaways I don't know anything about. That meant my dad was married to someone before he married my mom." Lefty Lewis's daughter said, "Well, I think it's a sin. I'm a half a mind to keep this boy for a while to put some fear in his daddy's heart. But he probably would never miss him." Lefty Lewis said, "Now you stop being so judgmental. Herman's got a reputation for being no nonsense, not mean. Does this child have any brothers or sisters?" "I believe he's got a sister, but she'd have to be his half-sister. She must be full-grown by now." The woman pulled the blanket back over my legs and shook me again. I was glad I could stop pretending I was asleep. I was sick and tired of hearing about how skinny I am and what a mixed up family I come from. She said, real soft, "Bud, wake up. Come on, sweetie. I've got a nice breakfast waiting for you." "Food?" I started blinking and acting like those were the first words I'd heard all morning. I said, "Huh?" Like I was kind of confused. The woman smiled real big and said, "Oh, I see that got your attention, didn't it? Good morning, young man." "Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, Mr. Lewis." He said, "Hey, you remembered my name. I'm impressed." "Good morning, Walking Willie. We've got to hit the road in a bit, but better hurry up and get some food in your belly." He acted like he was whispering just to me when he said, "The food in this joint isn't the best, but I guarantee after you eat you won't be hungry for days. This meal's going to be sitting on your stomach like a rock for a good time." The woman said, "Ignore him, Bud. My father doesn't mean anything. He just can't stop teasing." I said, "I know, ma'am. He told me I've got a head shaped like a peanut." The woman slapped the arm of her father. "Papa, I can't believe you teased this boy already. What is in your mind?" Lefty Lewis rubbed his hand over my head and said, "Look at this noggin. I rest my case. Boy looks like one of George Washington Carver's experiments, sprouted legs and run off. You sure you're not from Tuskegee, Alabama, Bud?" I said, "No, sir." The woman sucked in her lower lip and swallowed a smile before she said, "See, Bud, he can't help himself. He really doesn't mean anything. Do you, Papa?" The way she said that, you'd have to be pretty stupid not to know the answer, not to know how to answer her. Lefty Lewis said, "Not a thing. It's just that his daughter spoke up. My name is Mrs. Sleet, Bud. Pleased to meet you, ma'am. Now, while you wash up, I'm going to get some clothes that my boy outgrew a while ago. Barely been used. So when you get dressed, you come down and we'll eat. You chose a great place to visit. We're having a very special breakfast today. Pancakes, sausages, and toast, and a big glass of orange juice. You can meet Scott and Kim, too. How's that sound? That sounds real good, ma'am. Thank you very much. Don't mention it. It's a pleasure to have such a well-mannered young visitor. Mrs. Sleet and Lefty Lewis left the room. As soon as they were a little bit down the hall, I could hear her start to scold her father again. I just can't believe it. You know, Mama was right about you. All I could hear next was him mumbling something, some answer, and her slapping his arm again. After I got to the bathroom, I saw that Mrs. Sleet had put up some clean clothes on my bed. The old clothes were gone, all except for my drawers, which I hadn't taken off. She even put clean drawers out for me. So when I put them on, I stuck my old ones down in the pocket of my new pants. I could ditch them when I got to Grand Rapids. It's embarrassing to have strangers look at your dirty drawers, even if the stranger is as nice as Mrs. Sleep. The new clothes were just a little too big, but they were long pants and not knickers, so I didn't care. I rolled cuffs into the pants and sleeves, and they fit pretty doggone good. Man, my first pair of trousers. I let my nose lead me down to where the smell of pancakes and toast were coming from. The Sleets had a room for eating, and it had a great big table right in the middle of it. The first thing I noticed was a huge pile of pancakes sitting on a blue and white plate on top of the table. Lefty Lewis was sitting with Mrs. Sleet's kids. The little girl with the big smile, and the boy was looking at me kind of hard. It wasn't one of those put up your dukes looks. It was just like one dog gives another dog that might be passing through the neighborhood. Lefty Lewis said, Bud, these two worrisome midgets are my favorite grandkids. Kim is my favorite granddaughter, and Scott is my favorite grandson. Of course, they are my only grandkids, so in fairness, you have to say that they are at least favorite grandkids. These two had had a lot of practice being around their teasing old granddad because they didn't pay no mind to him at all. I said, my name is Bud, not Buddy. The little girl said, that's strange, Bud, not Buddy. And even though she was kind of young and scrawny to be teasing folks, I could tell that I could tell that was exactly what she was doing. Lefty Lewis laughed and said, that's my girl. Then he went to the kitchen. Scott looked up to make sure the grown folks were around and said, you really run away from home? I had to stop and think. It's one thing to lie to a grown-up. Most adults wait to hear something that lets them take their attention off of you and put it on something else. That makes it easy and not too bad to lie to them. You really just have to give them what they want. It's different when you lie to another kid. Most time kids really don't know what they're asking you. I guess I'd been thinking for too long because he said, you run all the way from Grand Rapids to Owasso? Was it because your daddy used to beat you? I could answer that before with the swear forth truth. Shucks, my daddy never laid a hand on me in his life. Then how come you run? I didn't like it where I was. That wasn't a lie. Well, if you're lying about your daddy beating you, you better scram right after breakfast, 'cause my Gramps is taking you straight back home. My daddy never laid a hand on me. The little girl said, Scott, you talk too much. Let him sit down. Then she told me, Mama's going to be bringing the sausages in a minute. You like sausages? Uh-huh. I never had sausages before, but if that's what was making the house smell so good, I was going to love it. Kim said, good, because my grandpa brought them all the way from Grand Rapids. He always brings us good food, and we're going to share it with you, because Mama says since you're our special guest, we have to treat you nice. Am I being nice? So far. Good, I'll make a deal with you. Uh-oh, what kind of deal? I'll sing a song that I made up all by myself, and when I'm done, I will get to ask you one question, and you have to answer and cross your heart to tell the truth. Well, that didn't sound too bad. Okay, here goes. It took me a very long time to make this song up, so I hope you like it. The boy said, oh, brother. Kim sang, Mommy says no. Mommy says no. I listen. You don't. Wah ha 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 ha. The building falls down. The building falls down. You get crushed. I don't. Wah ha ha ha. Boy, that was about the worst song I'd ever heard. Kim stood up and bowed like a princess. I clapped my hands together, kind of soft under the table. She said, thank you very much. Scott just shook his head. Kim said, Okay, that's my part of the deal. Now you've got to keep your part and answer a question, any question I ask. Okay. Now you can tell me all about how your mother died. Scott's foot kicked underneath the table. Kicked her under the table. I said, "Who told you my mama died?" The little girl said, "Oops," and stuffed something in her hand into her mouth. My mama got sick. She died real fast. She didn't feel no pain or no suffering. Kim said, "I hope my mother never dies." Scott said, "Stupid, everybody's going to die." Kim said, "Oh, I'm telling Mama you called me stupid." He said, "You do, and I'll tell her that you've got one of those pancakes in the pocket of your dress." She shut right up. I told her, "He's all right. Everybody's got to die. It's not sad unless they do it in a real slow and suffer. My mama died so quick and painless that she didn't even have time to close her eyes. She didn't even have time to make a face like she was hurting." Both of Lefty Lewis's grandkids looked real surprised at the news. Mrs. Sleet came into the room with another blue plate covered with little round pieces of meat. Those had to be the sausages. She saw the way her kids were looking at me with their mouths half open and said, "Now you two aren't talking Bud's ear off, are you?" Scott said, "No, Mama, I'm not, but Kim's coming real close to." Kim said, "I was not. I was just making pleasant conversation." Mrs. Sleet laughed and set the plate on the table right in front of me. Lefty Lewis came out with a big glass jug filled with orange juice and sat it down next to me. Mrs. Sleet sat down. "Scott and Kim, would you say grace, please?" Everyone ducked their heads, and the two kids said, "God is great, God is good. Let us thank him for our food. Amen." Then people started passing the big blue plates around and stabbing toast and pancakes and sausages with their forks. I watched to see how much everyone took and tried to do the same. Then I started to watch how much food the two kids put on their fork every time, so I wouldn't look like a pig. Lefty Lewis noticed I was taking a long time and told his daughter, "See what I told you, Nina? Poor Bud Not Buddy is so skinny that his stomach has shrunk down so much that he was just smelling the food and it's got the boy full." Oh, well, I guess that just means more food for the rest of us. Everyone, except for me and Mrs. Sleet, yelled a big cheer. Eating with the Sleets and Lefty Lewis was real hard to do, not because they had bad table manners or nothing, but because they talked through the whole breakfast. They kept trying to get me to talk too. At home after Grace, we weren't allowed to say boo. Eating and being quiet is a hard habit to break. Every time one of the Sleets would talk to me and look at me like they expected an answer, I'd look around first to make sure no one was watching. At the home, if you got caught talking during mealtime, you'd have to get up and leave your food. If these Sleets had to live under those rules, they had starved to death. They talked after every swallow. They talked after every drink they took. They talked whilst they were wiping off their lips. Shucks, the little girl Kim talked with milk running down in her throat. Some of the time her words got glugged up when she was swallowing. I then laughed. Man, did they laugh. And they laughed. Man, did they laugh. It was hard to tell whose story they were laughing at. They were doing so much chattering. Lefty Lewis was talking about a radio show, and Scott was talking about going to the baseball game to watch Lefty Lewis pitch, and Kim was talking about a little girl she didn't like, and Mrs. Sleet was talking about some people called redcaps. Kim said to her mother, "Mommy, can't you tell that Bud Not Buddy doesn't know what a redcap is? You got to explain better." Mrs. Sleet said, "Oh, sorry. But redcaps are men that work the railroad station during the trains and taking people's bags to their car. That's what Mr. Lewis does. My husband is a Pullman porter. He takes care of people once they're on the trains." Kim said, "Yeah, our dad gets to travel all over the country on trains for free." Scott said, "That's because he's working. It's not for free. He gets paid to do it." Lefty Lewis swallowed a big hunk of sausage and said, "You know what, Bud? I bet the thing he misses most is Nina's cooking. I can't tell how proud I am of how far my daughter's cooking has come. This might be hard to believe, but she used to be such a bad cook that her fried chicken was known to have turned a chicken hawk into a vegetarian." Scott and Kim and Mrs. Sleet started busting a gut. "Yep," Lefty Lewis said. "I brought a friend to Flint a couple of years ago, and even though I'd warned him, tried to be polite and ate 4 pancakes of hers. Poor soul held his stomach all the way back to Grand Rapids. Said to me, 'Lefty, I don't mean to show you any disrespect, but those weren't pancakes your daughter served me. Those were pain cakes.' Mrs. Sleet laughed along with everyone else and said, "Well, I'm sure I don't need to hear any more of this," and picked up the empty sausage plate and went into the kitchen. As soon as she got out of the room, Kim whispered, "Quick, Grandpa, tell Bud Not Buddy how many times you had to pull the car over when you two were going back to Grand Rapids so that man could get out and vomit on the side of the road." Before Lefty Lewis could answer, Mrs. Sleet came back out of the kitchen with the big wooden spoon and whopped her father a good lick in the head.